On the day Caleb Mercer lost his job, he stood in a warehouse parking lot with a cardboard box in his arms and the terrifying knowledge that his 6-year-old son had one warm dinner left before hunger started asking questions. He should have gone straight home. He should have saved every dollar, every bite, every scrap of hope for the little boy waiting in their apartment. Instead, Caleb crossed a frozen city park and saw an old woman shaking on a bench while rich people stepped around her like she was trash blown against the pavement. No one stopped. No one even looked. Caleb had nothing left but a hot meal, a few coins, and the promise he had made to his dead wife that he would remain a decent man no matter how cruel life became. So he sat beside the stranger, opened the food, and gave her half. Only after she asked his name did her eyes fill with tears. Caleb thought he had fed a homeless woman. He had no idea she was Helena Vale, one of the most powerful billionaires in America, and she had been testing the entire city. And Caleb had just changed everything. The day the floor fell out. Caleb Mercer had always believed a man could survive almost anything if he still had work to do and a child waiting at home. And for 2 years that belief had held up his life. He was 39, quiet, broad-shouldered, and tired in a way he never admitted aloud. Each morning before sunrise, he left the small apartment he shared with his 6-year-old son, Jonah, kissed the boy's forehead while he slept, and rode the bus to Whitcomb Freight, a warehouse where the air smelled of cardboard, diesel, and sweat. It was not a dream job, but it paid rent, bought groceries, kept the heat on, and gave Jonah the one thing Caleb valued more than comfort: safety. Since Marla died, safety had become Caleb's religion. Cancer had taken his wife 2 years earlier, leaving bills, hospital memories, and a little boy who asked if heaven had windows so his mother could watch him sleep. Caleb had promised Marla that Jonah would never feel abandoned. He promised food, warmth, school shoes, bedtime stories, and a father who would not fall apart. He had not promised happiness because grief had taken too much, but he had promised steadiness. So Caleb built steadiness out of scraps. He cooked cheap meals like feasts, laughed when Jonah laughed, and cried only in the shower where the water could hide it. Their apartment was small. The couch sagged and the kitchen table had burn marks, but Caleb made it warm. He never told Jonah how close they lived to the edge. Children should not know that rent can stalk a man like a wolf or hear their father counting quarters in the dark. Caleb carried that fear alone because carrying it was part of the promise. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning in November, the promise cracked. The warehouse manager called the afternoon shift into the loading bay before lunch. At first, Caleb thought it was about safety rules or holiday schedules. Men stood in steel-toed boots, waiting to return to forklifts and pallets. But the manager did not joke. The company, he said, was restructuring. Contracts had changed. Costs had risen. Decisions had been made. The words floated around Caleb without meaning until the names began. One by one, men stepped forward and came back smaller. Caleb Mercer. For a second, he did not move. Then someone touched his elbow and he walked up as if his legs belonged to another man. He received an envelope, a final check, and a packet about benefits that sounded like a foreign language. The manager shook his hand and said he was sorry. By noon, Caleb stood in the parking lot with a cardboard box under one arm. Inside were his gloves, a dented thermos, spare socks, and a framed photograph of Jonah missing his 2 front teeth. Behind him, the warehouse kept humming. Trucks backed into loading docks. Forklifts beeped. Men who had kept their jobs returned to work because freight did not care whose life had collapsed. That was the cruelest part. The world did not explode when Caleb lost his job. It continued with perfect indifference. He sat in his old pickup staring at the envelope on the passenger seat. His first thought was Jonah's cereal box almost empty. Then rent due in 9 days, the electric bill under the refrigerator magnet, and the aquarium field trip form Jonah had brought home with shining eyes. Caleb opened his banking app even though he knew the number would hurt. It was worse than he hoped. A few dollars after payments cleared. No savings worth naming. No parents to call, no brother with a spare room, no net beneath him. Shame came next, hot and unreasonable. He knew layoffs were not personal. He knew he had worked hard and never stolen a minute. Still, shame whispered that a better man would have planned better, saved more, protected his child from this exact moment. It put Marla's hospital bed in his mind and made him hear his own voice promising he would keep their boy safe. Caleb bent forward until his forehead touched the steering wheel. He did not cry. He did not have the luxury. At 3 o'clock, he drove toward home, but could not make himself go straight there. Jonah would be waiting with his backpack half open, talking too fast about crayons, planets, or whether turtles had feelings. Caleb would have to smile, cook dinner, and explain that Daddy's job was gone without making the apartment feel less solid beneath Jonah's feet. The thought tightened his chest until breathing felt like work. He stopped at a corner market 2 blocks from Halden Park and stood under the buzzing lights, staring at cheap noodles, canned beans, and day-old bread. The sensible choice was clear. Stretch every dollar, prepare for a hard week, maybe a hard month. But then he pictured Jonah sensing fear in the air, trying to be brave because his father looked broken. Jonah had already lost his mother. Caleb could not bear to let him lose one normal night, too. So he bought one hot meal from the counter in back, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a roll, enough for a father and son if the father took less. It cost too much. Caleb paid with almost the last cash in his wallet, then stepped outside holding the warm container against his coat like something sacred. He told himself it was foolish. He also knew he would do it again. One more safe dinner. One more evening where Jonah could laugh before the truth entered the room. Caleb chose the long way home through Halden Park, not because it was faster, but because he needed a few more minutes to become the man his son deserved. The trees were bare, the benches wet with cold, and the late light had turned the city the color of old steel. He held the meal in one hand and the box from the warehouse in the other, thinking of Rent Marla and Jonah's trusting face, when he saw a woman sitting alone near the path. She was hunched in layered rags, shaking hard against the wind while people streamed past without slowing. Caleb took one more step, then stopped, half of the last meal. Caleb stopped so suddenly that a man in a wool coat clipped his shoulder and muttered before hurrying on. The woman on the bench did not look up. She sat folded beneath layers that seemed rescued from trash cans, a torn brown coat, a gray scarf dragging near the wet pavement, gloves split at the fingers. A canvas bag leaned against her ankles, swollen with whatever life she could still carry. She was not begging or shouting. She was simply shivering while the city passed around her like water around a stone. That was what kept Caleb from moving. She asked for nothing, and still they treated her as if she had stopped being human. A young couple stepped wide around her. A man with polished shoes glanced once, then lowered his eyes to his phone. A woman with shopping bags pulled her little girl closer, though the child looked back with a confused kindness that had not yet learned to hide. Caleb watched them all and felt something raw open inside him. That morning he had been a man with a job. Now he carried his work life in a cardboard box. The distance between his apartment and that bench suddenly felt frighteningly short. A layoff, a late rent notice, a broken car. People did not fall all at once, they were pushed by inches until the ground disappeared. He looked at the food in his hand. The container was warm against his palm, and the smell of chicken and gravy made his stomach twist. Jonah would be hungry. Jonah deserved the whole meal. Caleb tightened his grip and took one step forward, meaning to keep walking. Then he heard Marla's voice not as a ghost, but as conscience wearing the sound of the woman he had loved. Pain doesn't give us permission to stop seeing people. She had whispered that once in a hospital hallway after a nurse's aide snapped at a frightened old patient. Now, standing in the cold with his last hot dinner in his hand, Caleb understood that goodness was not fragile. It was heavy. It demanded something. His fear argued hard. Jonah first, rent first, survival first. But another truth rose beneath those voices. If he walked past her, he would still be unemployed, still broke, still afraid. The only thing he would save was half a meal, and the thing he would lose was harder to name. He had promised Marla he would protect Jonah, but what kind of man would he be teaching his son to become if protection meant letting another human being freeze beside him? Caleb stepped off the path. The woman noticed his boots first. Her shoulders drew inward, preparing for insult, command, or trouble. He knew that movement. It was the body making itself small before the world could do it. "Ma'am," Caleb said gently, stopping far enough away not to scare her. "It's cold out here." Her eyes lifted. They were dark, alert, and strangely clear. There was suspicion in them, but intelligence too. Caleb noticed it, then let it go. Hunger did not erase who a person had been before life found them. "I don't want anything from you," he added. "I just have some food." She stared at the container, then at him. Around them, people continued to pass, irritated by the small island of discomfort he had created simply by stopping. Caleb sat on the far end of the bench, leaving space between them, placed the warehouse box at his feet, and opened the meal. Steam rose into the gray air. The woman swallowed. That tiny motion settled the decision more firmly than any prayer could have. He broke the roll in two, divided the chicken as evenly as he could, pushed more mashed potatoes toward her side than his, and held out one half of the container lid like a plate. "Here," he said. "It's still hot." She did not take it. Her eyes searched his face as if kindness must contain a trick. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was rough from cold, but beneath it was something controlled, almost elegant. Caleb gave a tired little laugh. "Because you look like you need dinner." "So do you," she said. The answer startled him. Most people in need either thanked you quickly or refused from pride. This woman studied him as if he were the strange one. Caleb looked down at his worn jacket, cracked hands, and the cardboard box by his boots. "Yes, ma'am," he admitted. "I do." He held the food out again. This time she took it. Her fingers trembled so badly the gravy almost spilled, but Caleb pretended not to notice. He picked up his own portion and ate slowly, not because he was not hungry, but because he did not want her to feel watched. For a while they said nothing. The wind moved through the bare trees. Somewhere near the playground an empty swing creaked. Caleb thought of Jonah and felt guilt press against his ribs, but it was no longer pure panic. He had not solved anything. He was still a jobless father with bills closing in. Yet beside that woman sharing what he had almost refused to share, he felt the first clear breath he had taken all day. Fear had shrunk the world until there was room only for him, Jonah, and disaster. This foolish little act widened it again. He was not only a man being crushed by life, he was still a man who could choose. Maybe poverty could take almost everything, but not that, unless he handed it over. After a few bites, the woman turned slightly toward him. "Do you always feed strangers in parks?" Caleb shook his head. "No, most days I'm trying to keep my own house standing." And today pride told him to keep his trouble private, but the bench, the cold, and her direct gaze made lying feel useless. "Today I lost my job," he said. "Warehouse cutbacks, no warning. I've got a little boy at home, 6 years old. This was supposed to be his dinner. Ours, really. One good meal before I figure out how to tell him things might get hard." The woman went still. "Then why would you give any of it to me?" Caleb looked at the half-empty container. He thought of his mother stretching soup with water and still sending a bowl next door when the neighbor's lights were shut off. He thought of Marla thanking nurses by name while pain hollowed her out. "Because if I wait until I have plenty before I act decent," he said quietly, "I may never get around to it. And because my boy needs food, yes, but he also needs a father who can look him in the eye." The woman's lips parted, but no words came. Caleb reached into his pocket, felt the few folded bills left there, and knew fear would return soon. For the moment, he let it wait. He had made his choice. Whatever happened next, he would go home poorer in money, but not poorer in himself. The weight of a smaller plate. Caleb did not leave the bench right away, even after the food was gone. Something about the woman's silence held him there. Not like a demand, but like a hand resting lightly on his sleeve. She had eaten with careful restraint at first, as if afraid the meal might be taken back, then faster when warmth reached her body and hunger overruled pride. Caleb pretended to study the path ahead because he knew dignity could be wounded by a stare. When she finished, she kept both hands wrapped around the empty lid, soaking up the last of the heat. "You said you have a son," she murmured. Jonah Caleb answered before he thought to protect the name. Then he smiled faintly, tired but softened by the boy's image. "He's 6, thinks dinosaurs should still exist, and that pancakes count as dinner if you put blueberries in them." A small sound escaped the woman, almost a laugh, but it broke before it became one. "And his mother?" Caleb's eyes moved to the bare trees. The question hurt, though not because she had asked it cruelly. Some grief was always sitting nearby, waiting for its name to be called. "Gone," he said. 2 years now." The woman lowered her face. "I'm sorry." "Me too." He rubbed his palms together, feeling the cold return through his gloves. She was the decent one. "I'm mostly just trying not to embarrass her memory." The woman looked at him sharply then, as if that sentence had struck somewhere private. "You think that is what you did here?" Caleb gave a quiet shrug. "I don't know what I did. I know I made tonight harder, but I also know if I had walked past you, I'd be carrying that home too." She watched him for a long moment, and he felt the oddest sensation that she was weighing every word as if it mattered far more than it should. "What will you do now?" she asked. That question brought the world rushing back. Rent bills, Jonah's shoes, the empty space where tomorrow's paycheck should have been. Caleb closed the food container, though there was nothing left inside but gravy streaks. "I'll do what people do when they don't have a choice. I'll start early, call temp agencies, fill out applications, knock on doors if I have to. I can lift drive, sweep load, fix a little, learn the rest. Somebody needs a man who shows up. And if nobody does..." Caleb looked at her, and for the first time that day, his fear did not get to answer first. "Then I keep asking until somebody does." The woman's eyes glistened. He mistook it for cold and reached into his pocket, finding the last $3 folded beside a receipt. He hesitated only once. Those bills were bus fare, maybe milk money, maybe the difference between walking and riding if the weather turned worse. Then he thought of her spending another night with nothing warm, and the hesitation shamed him enough to end it. He placed the money on the bench between them. "There's a diner 2 streets over. Coffee's cheap. Stay inside as long as they let you." She stared at the bills as if he had set down something impossible. "You cannot afford to give me that." "Probably not," Caleb said, standing and lifting his cardboard box. "But you can't afford not to have it." The woman rose halfway unsteady, her hand gripping the bench. "Your name," she said quickly. "Please, Caleb Mercer." "Caleb Mercer," she repeated, not like a stranger remembering, but like someone making a vow. "You have no idea what you've done." He smiled because he thought she meant the food. "It was only dinner." "No," she whispered, and her voice trembled in a way that made him uneasy. "It was not." Caleb wanted to ask what she meant, but the sky was darkening and Jonah would be waiting. So he nodded once, told her to stay warm, and walked away poorer than he had arrived. By the time he reached the apartment, the half meal in his hand looked smaller than he had hoped. He paused outside their door, breathed until his face obeyed him, and went in smiling. Jonah ran to him with a paper rocket he had made at school, talking so fast the words tripped over one another. Caleb set down the warehouse box behind the couch before Jonah could ask why Daddy's work things were home. He warmed the food, added toast, sliced an apple thin enough to fill the plate, and called it a picnic dinner. Jonah accepted this as magic. Children did that sometimes. They turned a parent's desperation into an adventure without knowing it. Caleb ate less and claimed he had grabbed something earlier. Jonah gave him a suspicious look, then offered him a bite of chicken from his own fork. The tenderness of it nearly broke Caleb in half. After dinner, Caleb washed the dishes while Jonah colored at the table. "Daddy." "Yeah, buddy." Are you sad? Caleb kept his hands in the sink. A little tired. From work. The lie stood right in front of him, easy and poisonous. Caleb dried his hands, sat across from his son, and chose a smaller truth. Work changed today. I may be looking for a new place to work soon. Jonah's crayon stopped moving. But we're okay. Caleb reached across the table and covered the boy's hand with his own. We're okay tonight, and tomorrow I'm going to work very hard to keep us okay. It was not enough, but it was honest. Later, after stories and prayers, Caleb opened his laptop at the kitchen table and began fighting back. He searched warehouse jobs, delivery jobs, janitor jobs, night shifts, anything within bus distance. He wrote his name into forms until the letters blurred. He called an old supervisor, left messages, emailed resumes, and made a list on the back of an overdue bill. Action did not erase fear, but it gave fear somewhere to stand. At midnight, just as he was about to close the laptop, someone slid an envelope under the apartment door. Caleb froze. For one wild second, he thought of the woman in the park, but when he opened it, his stomach dropped. It was from the landlord. Unpaid balance due late fees added 5 days to cure, or formal proceedings would begin. 5 days. The room tilted. Caleb looked toward Jonah's closed door, then at the list of jobs, then at the envelope shaking in his hand. The bench had tested his heart. This paper tested everything else. He folded the notice carefully, placed it beside the laptop, and sat back down. There would be no sleep now. He had 5 days to keep the roof over his son's head, and morning suddenly felt very far away. A man who stopped running. Caleb watched the rent notice until the black print seemed to grow teeth. 5 days before the apartment that held Jonah's drawings, Marla's photographs, and every bedtime story Caleb had survived telling could become another place they had lost. His first instinct was shame. It urged him to fold the paper, hide it, pretend he had not seen it until pretending became impossible. That was how fear protected itself, by making a man silent. But silence had never paid rent, and it had never raised a child. Caleb looked toward Jonah's bedroom, where a strip of hallway light lay under the door, and something in him hardened not into anger, but into decision. He had spent the whole day being hit by life. Now he would start hitting back, even if all he had were tired hands and a borrowed hour before sunrise. He opened the laptop again and made 3 columns on a sheet of paper. Jobs, bills, people. Under jobs, he wrote every warehouse, grocery store, delivery company, school district, and cleaning service within reach. Under bills, he wrote what could wait and what could not. Under people, his pen paused. Caleb was good at carrying weight. He was terrible at admitting it was crushing him. Pride told him not to call anyone. Pride sounded noble until he looked again at the rent notice and realized pride was only fear wearing a cleaner shirt. So he wrote names: a former supervisor, a church deacon from Marla's funeral, and Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor who sometimes watched Jonah. Then Caleb bowed his head. Marla, he whispered, because prayer and grief had become the same language. I'm trying. At 6 in the morning, he packed Jonah's lunch with the last peanut butter, walked him to school, and listened to him talk about a spelling test as if the world were still ordinary. At the gate, Jonah hugged him longer than usual. You look different, Daddy. Caleb forced a smile. Different how? Jonah studied him with serious eyes, like when superheroes are tired but still go. Caleb laughed once and the sound hurt. Then I better go. The moment Jonah disappeared inside, Caleb began. He called the landlord first. His hands shook before he pressed the button, but his voice did not. He did not beg. He did not lie. He explained the layoff, offered a partial payment from the final check, and asked for time. The landlord, Mr. Voss, was not cruel, just practical in the way people become when another person's emergency is only a number on their screen. 5 days, Mr. Mercer, he said. I can note your call, but I cannot promise more. It was not mercy, but it was not a locked door either. Caleb thanked him anyway. That was the first part of his change. He refused to let fear make him small. The second came harder. He called people. Some did not answer. Some gave sympathy that ended before action. One man said he would keep an ear out, which Caleb knew meant nothing. At a temp office, a woman behind glass told him there might be overnight unloading work next week. At a grocery store, a manager said he was overqualified for carts, but underqualified for assistant stock lead, a sentence so useless Caleb almost smiled. By noon, his feet hurt, his phone battery was low, and hunger made the city sharper around the edges. He bought nothing. The $3 he had given the woman in the park was gone, and strangely, he did not regret it. Regret would have been easier if the gift had been foolish, but every time he pictured her hands wrapped around warm food, he knew he had done the only thing that allowed him to remain himself. What frightened him now was the cost of being himself. By late afternoon, he reached St. Bridget's Community Center, a brick building he had avoided since Marla's funeral, because accepting help there felt too much like returning as a failure. Inside, the walls smelled of soup and old coffee. A volunteer recognized him and softened at once. Caleb, honey. That nearly undid him. Kindness could be harder to endure than indifference. He asked about emergency rental assistance, keeping his words clear, his shoulders straight. The forms were long. The funds were limited. Nothing could happen fast. Still, he filled out every page. While he wrote, he saw a man at the next table holding a baby and crying quietly into his sleeve. Caleb had spent so much of the day feeling alone that the sight startled him. The city was full of people one notice away from collapse. The bench had not been an exception. It had been a warning. He left with a bag of pantry groceries, 2 bus vouchers, and a humility that did not feel as poisonous as he had expected. Help did not erase his dignity. Hiding from help almost had. That evening, Jonah found the warehouse box before Caleb could move it. "Why are your work gloves home?" he asked. Caleb stood in the kitchen with a can of soup in his hand and understood that the smaller truth from the night before had expired. He knelt so they were eye to eye. "Because that job ended," he said. Jonah's face changed, fear arriving before tears. Caleb took both of his hands. "Listen to me. Grown-up things are heavy, but they are not yours to carry. Mine. I am looking for work. I have asked for help, and we have food tonight. We are not giving up." "Do we have to leave?" the boy whispered. Caleb wanted to promise no. Instead, he gave the bravest truth he had. "I am doing everything I can to keep us here." Jonah leaned into him then, and Caleb held him so tightly he could feel the child's heartbeat. For the first time since the layoff, Caleb stopped trying to look unbreakable. He let Jonah see his eyes wet, then smiled through it. "Your mom used to say brave people tell the truth softly." Was Mom brave? The bravest person I ever knew. That night after Jonah slept, Caleb took Marla's photo from the shelf and placed it beside the job list. He was no longer apologizing to her memory. He was working beside it. At 8:17, his phone rang from a number he did not recognize. Caleb almost ignored it, thinking it was another bill collector. Then he answered. A calm woman's voice said, "Mr. Mercer, my name is Miriam Cole. I'm calling on behalf of Vale Meridian Group. Ms. Helena Vale would like to meet you tomorrow morning." Caleb frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "About a job." There was a pause. "About what you did in Halden Park." The kitchen went completely still. Caleb looked at Marla's photograph, at the rent notice, at the list covered in his own desperate handwriting. He did not know it yet, but the door he had opened with half a meal had finally begun to open back. The bench that reached the sky. Caleb arrived at Vale Meridian Group the next morning, wearing the same white shirt he had worn to Marla's funeral, because it was the only one he owned that still made him look like a man with a future. He had left Jonah with Mrs. Alvarez, kissed his son's hair, and promised he would be back before dinner. The tower downtown rose out of the cold morning like another world, all glass, steel, and revolving doors. Caleb paused before entering, aware of his worn shoes and calloused hands. For one hard second, he thought about turning around. Men like him delivered boxes to places like this. They did not get invited upstairs. Then he remembered the rent notice on the kitchen table and Jonah asking if they had to leave. He stepped inside. Miriam Cole met him in the lobby and guided him through security into an elevator, then down a quiet hallway where the carpet swallowed their footsteps. "Ms. Vale will explain," she said, opening a door. Caleb entered an office with windows wide enough to hold the entire city. Behind a broad desk stood a woman in a dark suit, silver hair pinned back, posture calm and powerful. He had never seen her before. Then she turned toward him and the world shifted. The clothes were different, the face clean, the shoulders no longer folded against cold, but the eyes were the same eyes from the bench. Caleb's mouth went dry. "You," he whispered. Helena Vale walked around the desk slowly, as if she understood that his mind needed time to put the two women together. "Yes," she said. "And before anything else, Mr. Mercer, I owe you the truth." She told him everything. She owned Vale Meridian. She had spent one day disguised as a homeless woman because she had been about to approve a restructuring plan that would cut thousands of jobs, and she wanted too late, perhaps, to understand the lives behind the numbers. She told him about being refused warmth in a cafe, about strangers turning away, about a mother pulling her child aside as though poverty were contagious. By the time she reached Halden Park, she had almost decided people were selfish all the way down. Then Caleb sat beside her with the last meal he could barely afford to share. Caleb listened with his hands clenched. Shock became anger for a moment, not because she had money, but because the pain had been real to him while the rags had been a costume to her. Helena saw it and did not defend herself. "You have every right to resent the deception," she said. "I cannot undo it. But the cold was real, the hunger was real, and the shame of being looked through was real. What you gave me was not only food. You gave me back my belief that power without mercy is failure." Caleb looked out over the city, all those roofs hiding all those families. "Why am I here?" Helena lifted a folder from her desk. "Because I searched for the man who stopped when no one else did. Because I learned you lost your job that same morning. Because people around me talk about values, but you showed me yours when it cost you something." She offered him a position in operations support, stable pay, benefits, training, and a path upward. Caleb stared at the papers and pride rose like a wall. "I don't want pity." "Good," Helena replied. "I am not offering it. Charity would insult what I saw. Work honors it." Those words reached him where money could not. He thought of Marla, who had loved him most when he was honest. He thought of Jonah, who needed not a perfect father, but a present one. Caleb took the folder. "Then I'll earn it." Helena's eyes softened. "I know, but the meeting did not end there. Grant Ellison and two board members entered expecting to finalize the layoff plan. Helena let them speak. They used words like efficiency pressure, necessary loss. Then she placed Caleb's rent notice beside their charts. "This is what your necessary loss looks like at a kitchen table," she said. She asked Caleb's permission with one glance, and he nodded. Then Caleb spoke not like a victim, but like a father. He described the parking lot, the box, the silence after a handshake, and the way a child's face changes when he wonders if home is still home. The room went quiet. For the first time, the numbers had a voice. Helena canceled the immediate cuts. She ordered a revised plan, reduced executive bonuses, delayed expansion, retraining programs, emergency wage protection, and a hardship fund for workers facing sudden crisis. Grant objected. Helena looked at him and said, "A company that survives by breaking its lowest people is already failing." Weeks later, Caleb stood in his apartment with his first paycheck in his hand. The rent was paid. The refrigerator was full. Jonah danced in socks across the kitchen because Caleb had brought home pancake mix with blueberries. That Saturday, father and son returned to Halden Park with 2 hot meals from the corner market. They sat on the same bench, or close enough that Caleb chose to believe it was. He told Jonah the story in words a child could carry, that once when Daddy was scared, he shared dinner with someone colder and hungrier. And that choice helped many people neither of them would ever meet. Jonah listened solemnly, then broke his roll in half and handed one piece back to Caleb. "So nobody eats alone," he said. Caleb felt Marla in the quiet after that, not as grief this time, but as warmth. In the distance, the city kept moving, hurried and blind in places, but not entirely frozen. Somewhere above it, Helena Vale was rebuilding an empire around human faces instead of numbers. Somewhere below, workers who would never know Caleb's name kept their jobs, their apartments, their dinners. And on a park bench, a father and son ate together richer than Caleb had ever been because he finally understood what his mother, his wife, and his worst day had all been trying to teach him. Love is not proven when life is easy. Family is not protected by fear, and the smallest kindness given at the moment it costs the most can travel farther than any fortune.